let's get into our program. And we do have Ben Allen on, thank goodness. Okay, and so it's Yes in My Backyard to Solve the Affordable Housing Crisis. And I just want to acknowledge that some people have been upset with this theme title. This theme title wasn't put up as it's just for Yes in My Backyard people. It's because we want to talk about how to solve the housing crisis, and we want to talk about this constitutional amendment that both Senator Ben Allen has sponsored and that the YIMBY Yes in My Backyard organization has co-sponsored. So that's how we came up with the theme. So today, State Senators Ben Allen and Scott Wiener co-authored an amendment to the state constitution called SCA 2 to repeal Article 34, which was originally passed in 1950 relating to public housing projects. So SCA 2 passed last year in the state Senate, last January, by the way, of a vote of 37-0. And it passed the state assembly in August, 73-0. And it was, and it will now appear on our proposition as a proposition on our 2024 ballot. So that's why we're talking about it here. I mean, you know, just like Carol was talking about the activism in terms of what's happening in November, we also have to start thinking about our 2024 ballot. So here to talk about this bill and the need to empower local governments to address low-income housing and homelessness are Senator Allen and Konstantin Hatcher, whose organization YIMBY was one of the co-sponsors of this bill. So I'm going to introduce both of them and then we'll go into the program. So please welcome California State Senator Ben Allen, representing Senate District 24. Lots has changed since he talked to us last April, including his Senate district, which used to be Senate District 26. Senator Allen was first elected in 2014, and he's serving his third and final term in the state Senate. He authored also Senate Bill 54, which was the most comprehensive measure in the nation addressing the plastic waste crisis and signed into law by Newsom in June last year. Since we're talking about housing, I would also like to acknowledge a win for Senate Bill 1444, which was authored by Allen and co-authored by Maritsuchi, to create the South Bay Regional Housing Trust, giving all the cities within the jurisdiction of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments the right to pool funding and resources to develop affordable housing to assist homeless populations along with people and families of extremely low, very low, and low income within the South Bay. This was signed by Newsom last September. So also, please welcome Konstantin Hatcher, YIMBY's Senior Director of Community Impact and former Obama campaign director. After the Obama campaign, he returned home to positively impact Los Angeles communities by continuing to lead the grassroots organizing efforts of several political campaigns and nonprofits to deal with the most pressing issues of the day. So each will talk. We'll have Senator Allen first, and then Konstantin. And then we will take questions in the room here and also via chat or if you raise your hand on Zoom. Okay, so I'm gonna just check again. I should have checked first. Zoom, you can hear everybody okay? Okay, great. All right, so we'll start with Senator Allen and then Konstantin.
Well, thank you so much. It's so good to see everybody, at least from afar, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. I'm up here in Sacramento. We got session tomorrow. I got a bunch of meetings I have to go attend to in the morning, so I'm up here. But it's so great to see everyone in person, and it's so good to see everyone on the computer. And looking forward to this discussion. Happy to open up the floor to questions on any topic. But I do want to talk about two topics that were mentioned. One of them, SCA 2 and the Article 34 appeal, and then the other, just an update on the work we've done on plastics and some of the environmental work we've been doing. SCA 2, and it's true that there were folks who were raised some concerns about about the title, I guess, of this event. One thing I will say is that while California YIMBY, who we're very much partnering with on this issue, is involved in a lot of different things, including measures that would override local decision making in the name of trying to create more housing. This particular thing that we're working on together, SCA2, which is the Article 34 appeal, is both bipartisan, and we had strong Republican support in the legislature, but also not a single project moves forward under this without the support of local government. So this was something put into the Constitution back in 1950. It's basically created an additional public vote for the development, construction, or acquisition of publicly funded low-rent housing projects. It was originally passed in the Constitution in response to President Truman's the Federal Housing Act of 1949, which was part of Truman's Fair Deal to help lower-income post-war families, a lot of people coming back from the war, move into better living situations. And this was a time when there were far fewer opportunities for local municipalities to block or alter plans for new housing. There was no Environmental Quality Act, no CEQA, no Brown Act, no Coastal Act, far fewer lawsuits in general. And Article 34 at the time was largely supported. Quite frankly, there's a pretty racially problematic history here that's been largely, pretty comprehensively reported on by the LA Times, because folks basically wanted to prevent their neighborhoods from becoming, racially integrated through the construction of public housing. Now the article stands as an antiquated and really expensive constitutional barrier that subjects local governments to a web of regulations and costly elections. These obstacles drive up the price of building publicly financed housing. And so we push this to take Article 34 out of the Constitution. Of course, it's going to go to the vote of the people, most likely in November. And the idea is that it's going to restore local leaders' authority and ability to provide housing to those who need it most. And it's a way of helping to address a lot of our broader housing challenges. The good news is, as I said, it was a strong bipartisan vote of both houses of the legislature. It's not going to be easy, but we're certainly going to ask the support of the PV Dems and others to help talk to your neighbors about the history of Article 34 in order to get this done. And I'd love to share with you. My team will share on the link, and also with the club. We can send out some of the really excellent reporting that's gone in on the LA, that the LA Times has done on the history of Article 34 and why it's so important to repeal Article 34. But let me just be really clear for everyone, and I'll repeat it because I know it's an issue of great sensitivity to a lot of people on the Hill and elsewhere. If Article 34 is repealed, not a single project moves forward without the backing and support and approval of the local elected officials who represent whatever your local community is, whether it's your city, your county, if it's unincorporated territory. So I think there were some folks that were a little confused about what we were trying to do, and it basically just removes an additional barrier that exists for this particular type of housing if local governments want it in their communities. And I'm certainly hopeful that we'll be able to get your support as we go into the election season next year. And by the way, let me just say, I was loving listening to all the reports. I love all the work that's going on in the club. My gosh, the victories in Wisconsin and elsewhere really do give me some hope. It's hard not to get depressed sometimes when you read the national news and watch the national reports. So much of the energy that we're starting to see reinvigorate Democratic campaigns and in all sorts of different places is due to the activism and the energy that you helped to put into this work. And I just want to thank everybody who's been so involved in making those phone calls, writing letters, getting engaged. And it's so exciting to know that the club's going to be involved in helping our national efforts in the fall, because these are some really important elections. I mean, Governor Beshear's re-election, as was mentioned, that legislative election in Virginia, a couple of those in New Jersey, a couple of those other races that were mentioned, a couple of those elections that are mentioned. I'm so excited. I would love to join you in getting the vote out and working with you to help pump up those efforts. The only one thing I wanted to mention was just an update on some legislation that I know is of particular interest to the club, because I've spoken to you about it before. We talked about our efforts to reduce plastic pollution in California, and I'm just, many of you know, but we were really proud to report that the legislature and the governor, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law my bill SB 54, which is now one of the strongest anti-plastic pollution policies passed anywhere in the world. And it's got, and of course, we got it passed. So it was signed into law at 3 p.m. On the deadline day when we needed it in by 5. So it was a wild negotiation, went right up to the wire. But I'm so glad we finally got it done. But there's basically three key components here. First of all, we require the producers that the producers of plastics reduce the overall amount of single-use packaging that they're putting onto the market by 25% over the next 10 years. Then we require that all remaining material must truly be recyclable or truly compostable by the end of that same time frame. So we want less of the source out there, but that which you're putting out there, it's got to be recyclable or compostable. And by that, we mean truly recyclable or truly compostable, not just recyclable under perfect conditions in some lab in Cambridge somewhere at 1,000 degrees. We're talking about under real world conditions and actually getting recycled, and we're going to be holding the producers responsible for that. So the other thing is, by transferring, so we were basically transferring the financial responsibility for the end life of their products away from where they currently are, which is with ratepayers and the local governments, and we're transferring it over to the producers. And that also includes a $500 million annual fund for the next 10 years. It's going to that most producers are going to pay into to mitigate the environmental impacts of plastic pollution, particularly in vulnerable communities. It was an arduous multi-year process. It involved intense stakeholder negotiations. And ultimately, we got to a point where we got the support of both the environmental community, local governments, environmental justice, but also the business community. They didn't want the ballot measure. They knew they could probably beat it, but it was very popular. They knew they'd have to spend a ton of money to defeat it, and we weren't going away, and we were going to keep working on this, even if they had defeated it. So ultimately, they saw that it was important for us to strike a deal. But the measure was ultimately also strong enough that the key environmental groups who had qualified the ballot measure for the ballot felt comfortable pulling it back because they realized how strong this was. And I just want to thank the club for its steadfast support throughout the bill's 4 or 5 year journey. And we've already introduced legislation now, new legislation to build on the tremendous progress we've already made on plastic pollution, including, looking at extended producer responsibility for electric vehicle batteries. But we're also kind of looking at ongoing efforts across several state agencies to address the pervasive environmental and public health risks posed by plastic. It's now laid some fertile ground for the growth of alternative material types, and the bill is now actually stoking investment in some of these wonderful entrepreneurs, a lot of them California-based, that are producing the next generation of environmentally friendly packaging and products. Everything from cutlery made from unconventional sources, new types of packaging, et cetera. And all that's going to make a big difference in the end of life and all the costs that are currently being borne by ratepayers and taxpayers, et cetera. Some of these new materials are created from biological sources. They could be compostable or biodegradable in different types of environments or with the use of catalysts. Some are sourced from renewable feedstock, but they have the same properties as fossil fuel-based plastic. So right now, we currently lack a meaningful way to evaluate the potential benefits or long-term impacts of these new materials. And even our vernacular struggles to differentiate sustainable options from those that we might seek to shift away from. So we just introduced a new bill, SB 665, which will convene a working group of the relevant state agencies to develop a framework to evaluate all these plastics alternatives that are out there that continue to be introduced into the market. And so as to inform efforts that, to ensure that the materials are properly managed, but they're actually going to be good for the environment and not just greenwashing. And this group's going to include representatives from CalRecycle, the Water Board, Department of Toxic Substance Control, OWEHA, which is the Environmental Health Hazard Assessment folks, Ocean Protection Council. And it's basically all about trying to create a methodology for effectively evaluating and comparing these new alternative materials, along with recommending some policy approaches to ensure policy, that we've got some policies in place for proper regulatory oversight. And that would include, everything from developing production and consumer safety standards, evaluating environmental and public health impacts, recommending labeling, safe end of life management requirements, et cetera. So we're just trying to make sure that we do this right. And I once again, thanks so much again for the club's great work in helping our efforts. We also got a massive climate package through last year that I'm very proud of, that my staff was very involved in devising, the Environmental Quality Committee that I oversee. is going to really help to draft and refine all that legislation. Our staff helped to do so. And once again, it got California back at the front of the global conversation in the fight against climate change. And we're now excited to see the federal government following up and building upon a lot of our efforts. So anyway, really happy to be here. As always, love this club, and happy to answer questions either now or after Konstantin.
All right. Hey everybody, how's everybody doing this afternoon? Hope well? A little energy. Sorry, I'm a campaign guy. Yeah, I'm the fired up, ready to go. So just thank you for being here. Thank you to Senator Allen, who's joined and been a tremendous partner in SCA2 and Article 34 repeal. I just want to give a special shout out to you all though, because as a campaign person that focuses on the grassroots efforts, it's the Dem clubs like yours that are people that do it, that make the calls, that knock on doors, that share the messaging. Just so important, and especially it warms my heart to see what happened in Wisconsin as the 2012 Obama Operation Vote Director there, seeing firsthand on the ground how just what the Republican kind of state house, and at that time the governor, where they just ravaged the democratic process and just made things so terrible. So it's starting to see that roll back, and thanks to folks like you from across the country rallying to see that, make that happen is just so important. So a lot of love for you. Thank you so much for that. Yep. We just come on now. I got to So getting back to SCA2, for us, it was clear. It's just an extension of what our values are as an organization. When you're looking at, that's one of the just clearly racist pieces of policy that is part of our unfortunately shameful history of racist state-sanctioned racist policies to prevent not just minorities, but different income levels being able to have access to all the wonderful communities that California has to offer. And so, it's great that we're able to hopefully see that bipartisan support of something just so obvious, to start continuing to turn back the hands of what's been just a pretty poor history. And for us, that's just really in line with our values as an organization. One of the things that one of the kind of, I won't say a YIMBY Bible, I won't go that far, but kind of one of the seminal works that kind of sparked the YIMBY movement was, if you all have had a chance to read Richard Rothstein's Color of Law, where he really goes into depth around kind of where our housing crisis really stems from, not things like Article 34, but, redlining, racial covenants, and to be frankly, single family zoning. And so, where even places where you have apartments now standing have been downzoned so that even if those apartments went away, you couldn't build another apartment there where they're standing, right? And so for us, it's about how do we make a California that's affordable, where you live, work, and raise a family, that we have inclusive, vibrant communities where folks get to access all the wonderfulness that is California, and welcoming and being neighborly. And so when you look at the opportunities to do that, and start looking from a policy perspective, it becomes really difficult and paints a picture. So Article 34 is just one of those pieces, one of a blatant and shameful, obvious one, but there's a history of policy that we try to adjust, stem against, just to make it easier to just build housing. Up until a few years ago, in some of the bills we passed, it was illegal to build multifamily homes in about 76% of California. Now you're starting to see that start to change with bills like SB 9, where now you can build a duplex or a fourplex, and some of the ADU laws that came where you can build a granny flat. Hey, wouldn't that be great if your kids could live behind you and not have to move an hour away, or in what we're seeing in California, to another state, right? We lost a congressional district because we don't have enough housing for folks. And so, I think when we're talking about this, for us as an organization, it's about really creating inclusive communities and really seizing what's so great about California diversity, the richness that the state and the promise of California. I mean, look how great we have it here. We have you know, Senator Allen and being able to pass great laws, doing things that protect our environment, that are doing things to start to reform criminal justice system, to protect our health care, to protect our women's rights to make decisions for their own bodies. This is a wonderful state. And so let's make sure that we're being true to that and making that we're making this as a place that folks can stay, folks can raise families, that, you know, it's not just about like people that look like me being able to have access to communities. It's about having young people, young families being able to have access to communities, right? Without having to, you know, okay, I want more space for my family. I either have to move, but I want to live next to mom. You know, I want to live in that same community I grew up in. And so really it's not just about, it's about opening the communities and keeping, creating space for our families to live and grow and thrive as well. And so I think that's kind of our charge in the YIMBY movement. I think a lot of people have a little bit of misconception about us in terms of, you know, we're just like build at all costs, or, you know, shells of developers. We're actually, the case is quite different. We look at a spectrum of the continuum of housing, everything from, you know, from our houseless neighbors all the way to how do we get more access to really great neighborhoods and schools and jobs and amenities as well. And so we kind of develop that's our values. And then we, you know, for example, this year, our policy framework, we have like really 3 main goals of our policy this year. One is looking at, you know, all we've seen of the calamities with the environment. Let's build more housing where local governments already said that are ideal for more housing to be built, and not build and putting people in harm's way with fires and floods. So, you know, building more climate safe housing. 2 is, you know, how do we open opportunities for home ownership? A lot of the policy has been around, you know, rentals and things of that nature, but also what about our families that want to buy a home, right? If your, you know, son or daughter is looking at, hey, I want to buy our starter home, where can we buy one? And we might have to then move to, you know, down the road to another community, and then that's putting extra pressure on that community because those folks can't compete with the folks that should be able to buy a home right here in their own community, right? And then also opening those access up to other folks. And then lastly, looking at just building on the success, making sure that things that we've done in the past actually have the intended effects. You know, you pass a bill, then it gets implemented, and you're like, oh, we need to fix that, we need to fix that, we need to fix that. And so really making sure that it's having the intended effects that we wanted, but also budgeting against any unintended effects. And that's just kind of part of the policymaking process, making sure that we go back, we're being intentional, and then we're being smart about, okay, how is this working and how is this really being applicable in real folks' lives? And so those are the kind of things, and we're always, you know, thinking about the eye towards diversity, the eye towards equity, and how do we create equitable communities? And SCA2 is a great first step in that, but, you know, an example of another bill that we passed last year, AB 2873, was about having more diversity in the development of affordable housing. So we just kind of forces affordable housing builders that are using state funds. All the, you know, 50 billion went to affordable, big A, you know, deed restricted affordable housing that the state funded. How are we making sure that those folks that are developing that, and we know we need it, but how do we make sure that also the opportunity and that money is being spread around in an equitable way? So forcing those developers to, one, report what their diversity is, you know, how many women, how many minority-owned, veterans, disabled owned firms are in their development pipeline, then setting goals, and then making a plan. And so making sure that they're being intentional about that, so that the money that we're all paying is actually spread around and benefiting communities as well. So it's not just about building the housing, but also how are we using the economic benefits of building to benefit as many people as possible. So yeah, I think those are important. So let's open up for some questions.
Yeah, you can stay. Okay, so we're going to open this for questions, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat and hands-on chat. But I also want to just say that Konstantin, he touched on another bunch of issues in terms of equity, and also in terms of other bills that are coming. So one of the questions, or some of the things that we are going to be trying to link is, you know, last year we had We had a lot of controversy around SB 9, SB 10, and this year there's talks about the sunsetting of SB 35. So, you know, all these questions are on the table for today, and so we'll start first in the room, and then we'll go on Zoom.
For Konstantin, and Senator
And so, wait, I'm sorry.
Should we ask people to speak?
You have to come, no, I'm going to give you the speaking.
Sorry.
If you come up and just
I should
talk
know
to you,
that.
yeah. And please on Zoom, let us know that, you know, you can go here because the Zoom mic is there, and also you're going to
All
talk.
right. Okay, for Konstantin and for Senator Allen, we've talked about building, and we have talked about duplexes, fourplexes, ADUs. I have not heard anything about repurposing existing vacated commercial spaces, for instance, warehouses, office buildings, and we are seeing just a glut of commercial real estate, especially office buildings, as remote working is really coming into play because of Zoom and other wonderful technologies. I wish it had been the case before I retired. But at any rate, what can either or both of you say about the issue of repurposing existing commercial real estate?
That's a great question. Did you want to take that one, Senator, or I can take that? I was going to talk about AB 2011.
Yeah, I think that's a good example.
So that's a great idea. In fact, we sponsored a bill last year, or one of the lead advocates on Assembly Bill 2011, which basically does just that. It allows for density in commercial zones. So you can have density in commercial zones, and then also in commercial corridors, even more density, right? It allows that ministerial approval so that with certain conditions, right? To speak to our democratic values, right? There's like living wage requirements there, and like if it's a development that's larger than 50, you have to carry insurance for the builders. The idea is that we want the folks that are part of our building and to also be able to afford to live there. So what this bill 2011 does is in the commercial corridors, you can build mixed-use buildings, and by streamlining. One of the big things that slow down the building process, and that's why you hear a lot of like ministerial approval, streamlining, is because the entitlement process, both for affordable housing development, mixed-use development, market rate development, the entitlement process, going through all the regulations, is the part that really bogs down the process and really skyrockets the cost. And that's why you end up with only things you see is like these big buildings that are super expensive because to make it pencil out to actually afford to get it built, because of a big piece of that is the entitlement process. And so what this does is streamlines that to make it a little bit, you can do it a little bit faster, and which keeps that cost down. In commercial corridors, it's mixed use. In commercial zones, it's 100% affordable. So again, that's derestrict affordable housing in those zones. And so that just passed last year, and we're excited to see how transformational, to your point, to be able to better use our land, right? Why have land sitting that's empty when people could be living there and starting to bring those costs down, creating more inclusive communities as well. Senator Allen, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you did a good job. I mean, I will say, you know, just from a political perspective, I think that, you know, bills like 2011 that you just described are easier for people to get their head around than some of, you know, when you talk about, you know, going, you know, like certainly compared to some of the stuff that seeks to go after R1 zoning in general, right? I think that folks feel, you know, the commercial zones where it's certainly if it's being underutilized, I think there's a sense that it's a less of an impact on a neighborhood, for example, you know, converting all that stock, that building stock to housing. So, you know, I think part of what's going on right now is that the state's trying to figure out various ways to get more housing online, do so in a way that's going to both meet our housing goals, all the sort of broad, you know, equity goals that Konstantin articulated, but do so in a way that that kind of works with the culture of the state and the communities of the state. And that's, there's tension there for sure. But I think that that housing in traditional commercial zones, as long as the market can bear it, of course, they're going to build it if they feel like they can, they're going to build it if they feel as though the market can bear it. That sort of development, I think a lot of communities are pretty open to. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes together.
So we have a, so hold on, Steve Golden.
Steve Goldston?
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's great work, particularly the stuff about the plastics and everything. And I wanted to first endorse the book that you mentioned by Richie Rothstein. He was a community organizer with me in Chicago a long time ago, and it's a really good book. And I think there's the aspect which is touched on by the LA Times about on conflict with socialism. This was, I believe, used as a very sharp wedge issue against progressives in the early 50s as part of the Red Scare and everything like this. And it's how Chavez Ravine got taken away they jumped on this guy, Fred Wilkerson, and said, "Are you a communist?" And he said, "I'm not saying what I believe." And then the whole public housing that was supposed to go into Chavez Ravine was unwound. And then we got the baseball stadium. And my question also is about, or any of the bills passed or under consideration would allow, like the Del Amo Mall has this huge parking lots that you could build housing on with parking underground. And if Torrance did, like a 500 or 1,000 units like that, is the other cities around, can they combine and get credit for it, so that maybe other communities that aren't so amenable to or good for a big housing project could benefit from that? And I think it would be very economically viable, kind of like a Glendale approach.
Yeah, I mean, that's the logic behind the bill that was mentioned earlier that Al and I worked on, which is to try to kind of figure out a way for local communities to pool resources and put in together. Because, I guess I think one of the things we have to figure out here is how do we move forward with housing production, all the needed housing production that I think Konstantin rightly points out the need for, in a way that's also in a way that's smart, And there's some areas that are much better placed to take more housing than others because there's more jobs there's more transit. Maybe it's not in a very high fire risk zone, et cetera. And so that's exactly the idea behind this South Bay Regional Housing Trust that we've created. But I quite frankly would like to see more of that type of thing. I do think it's tricky when you don't want to let cities sort of outsource housing production way off on the other side of the region. But at the same time, you want to be cognizant of the fact that every city is different. And quite frankly, some cities are much better placed from an environmental perspective or otherwise to take more growth. And I think that's what I love about what we were able to do with this housing trust. And I'm really hoping it's going to provide for some more tools and resources and flexibility for the local governments in the South Bay to build more housing in a way that's really in line with the kind of the infrastructural realities of the region.
No, I couldn't say better. We were big supporters of 679 as well, and so great bill. And there isn't a one size fits all, and it's great that the southern region actually has a way to kind of, okay, how can we do this in a smart way that's equitable, that we're still unlocking neighborhoods and communities for folks, but doing it in a way that is not oppressive, and thinking about the other needs and being able to collaborate across municipalities to make sure that we're creating the smartest approaches. So.
I'm sorry, I would take from the room, but we have Wally on from the COG. So since you brought that up, I think he should respond. Wally? You can unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you both for interesting presentations. Okay, thanks. Senator, I have questions for both of you. So if you'll indulge me, Senator Allen, there is another constitutional amendment on the ballot. Not there yet, but it will. Our Neighborhood Voices, which you know, is returning all power to the local authority. How do you think that impacts what you're doing with your bill? That would also, I mean, how do they track with one another? And do you think one will steal votes from the other?
Oh, they're different. They're different, right? I mean, as they say, Article 34 appeal, and someone did ask in the chat, like, well, how does this help our housing problems? Because they're making the point in the chat. I think let's see here, it was Judy was saying that you've got local government opposition in many cases to housing. There are a lot of cities that welcome new housing, and Article 34 just makes it harder for them to draw down federal dollars to provide for more housing. So the measure you talked about doesn't implicate this really at all, because in the end of the day, Article 34 is going to help develop new housing in those cities and counties where they want to develop more of this type of housing.
Well, as we know, the election, that's why they vote, right? Is we can count the votes at the end of the day and see what happens. So for Konstantin, I wanted to take on a couple of topics, starting with the fact that there's YIMBYs and NIMBYs. And I just think this is an assault on intelligence, because YIMBYs is a word that really means we favor growth through density. And NIMBY means not in my backyard. It means not in nobody's backyard. It's a bad idea. And so NIMBY makes it sound selfish and greedy, that, well, no, not in my backyard. But the truth is, most people I know who are opposed to this sort of thing simply don't think it's a good idea anywhere, that you can't keep adding density. I would just add a link to that, which is I photograph in public spaces every Easter, and I was just at Echo Park, which was enjoyed by all these people sitting around there. And I thought, well, you know what? If you double the density around Echo Park and Echo Lake, you would be diminishing the value of this resource, because there'd be twice as many people here. And so what I've always wondered about the pro-growth phenomenon is that it doesn't talk about the amenities that have to go with it to make density more livable. And you can't point to transit, because the transit in the South Bay is 3% mode share. So then that gets, and I just gave a talk to SCAG about the so-called 20-minute city, in which you have to plan for proximity. And to successfully plan for proximity, that is not at this moment part of the pro-growth housing group. It's just, let's get the housing in there. It's the most important thing. At the end of the day, greenhouse gases is the most important thing, because we're going to see human suffering on a scale we've never seen before if we don't stop it. So if you're going to have growth, there's two pieces to this. You need to have the amenities that are necessary to make it all livable, and you have to build it in a way that you actually have not walkable, walk actual. And our research shows how to do that, and it's a particular way. And to do that, you need local planning that operates surgically. The last thing I want to say, and I know I'm saying a lot, is that it turns out we're just finishing a research project now on commercial redevelopment into housing. And you know what? It is not easy. As Senator Allen just said, it's got to meet the sort of economic profile of the property. It has to make market sense. And for the most part, we can't find it that it does. And we looked all over the South Bay. I'll publish that study will be published by July 1st if you're interested in how you do it. So I know that's a lot. I said a lot, but I'd be happy to respond to any of it. But let's not do YIMBY and NIMBY. That's just outright.
Well, yeah. So a couple of things. Number one, just the Echo Park example. Echo Park is actually one of the more densest neighborhoods in Southern California, Los Angeles area. I'm a lifelong Angelino. And so one of the pushbacks for some of the folks, the leaders in that area, is like, hey, why do we have to take on all the density? How come other places like Beverly Hills or Santa Monica's and other well-resourced communities take on some of that density too? They have plenty of park space, they have plenty of amenities, they can take on a few more folks. And it's about, again, we're talking about equity, right? People flooded in Echo Park because they couldn't afford to find a place to live in the other places. They didn't allow multifamily homes. And so what we're talking about is let's spread that love. Everybody deserves a little bit of love around and taking advantage of our wonderful cities, right? And so that's the comment on that. I think you are absolutely right that you're
One thing, your microphone is too close to your mouth.
Oh.
It's one of these mics that distance works better.
Oh. I'm just yelling at the people on the Zoom, like, why is he yelling at us? In terms of really making sure that the communities are planned with all the things that go into that, I think you're absolutely right. We don't just say growth for growth's sake. We say one of the many of our bills that we advocate for, we're talking about more density where there's great jobs. There's, a lot of times they're like within a mile and a half of regular public transportation. We advocate for more bike lanes, protected bike lanes, so people that are living in dense areas can access the streets safely and not like have their kids ran over by cars. We advocate for more money for infrastructure. And so we do take a kind of a holistic approach, and we do advocate for all those things because we recognize that growth for growth's sake is not what we want. What we're advocating for, like for example, our Assembly Bill 68 this year is about places where local governments have already identified years ago that hey, these are ideal spots because they're close. They have a supermarket, a grocery store, a park, a library, kind of a community like this. It'd be good to have a few more folks living around this area because they can get out, they can walk. And it's going to be a great community, right? And so those are places where we're saying the infrastructure already exists, right? We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people moving into a single community. We're talking about a little here, a little there, a little there. Pretty soon, you create enough space for folks. So I think that's an important feature of it. It's not just about just growth for growth's sake. It's about where does it make sense to have where we could take on a little more density, in quite frankly, places where they've been excluding people for a long, long time. I mean, it's not happening in a vacuum, right? So a lot of these communities have not been doing like the right thing for decades, right? On purpose, explicitly. And so we can't just leave it up to the cities to just handle the business because that's kind of how we got here in the first place. So, and I'm not saying it's all cities. I'm saying there's some amazing, really good active cities that are just trying to figure it out. And it's up to us we encourage the state to really help give the tools to make it easier for them. And the politics is real. Going back to Senator Allens, I mean, it's much easier for me to come out and say all these things, right? He has a variety of constituents that he has to talk to and balance out their needs. And it's difficult. If it was easy, everybody do it, as they say, right? And so we understand that it's challenging, and that's also part of why the state sometimes needs to take those steps to provide that cover for our local officials that are, it's more of a challenging vote for them. So they want to do the right thing. They want to have inclusive communities. And so it's a balance, there's no it's not just one thing. It's you have to really look at it from a very broad perspective and really think about how we can make the best policies to do this the right way. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Did Senator Allen have any response?
To this balance question?
It was to Konstantin, so let's move on.
The notion of really state directed growth through density.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I don't know that I share Konstantin's philosophy on this. I mean, I agree. Let me just say, I don't think that the one size fits all state directed growth makes sense. I understand it's become this almost inelegant way for folks to get bills through. But my problem with it is that you treat every city exactly the same, but different cities have different amenities, different infrastructure, some are much higher fire risk, some are much closer to transit, some are much closer to jobs. I'd much rather it be a kind of a regional decision-making process. As opposed to having it micromanaged from the state. Now, I think, that's part of the concept behind RENA. That's part of the concept of getting the cogs involved. But I do think some of the bills that have made their way through have been a little too heavy-handed in the way that they've treated every city the same. And I understand, it's interesting. The folks who've been pushing this, some of the top leaders in the legislature actually come out of local government themselves. And I think they feel as though the politics, as Konstantin says, is such that it's too hard for cities, to move forward on projects because there's all this local pushback. And so that you need the state to come in and be more forceful. I guess I just wish we could be less prescriptive city by city, and I wish we could work with regions to say, hey, we know we need to account for a certain amount of housing growth given economic trends, given where prices are. One of the things we do hear constantly from businesses and young people, it's really actually becoming the lack of housing options is harming our competitiveness, and it's certainly harming the ability of young people to be able to feel comfortable coming to California and living and growing here. And so I think there's a reason why there's so much push for greater housing production. The flip side is from my perspective, we ought to be looking for ways to figure out ways to grow, but do so in a way that's a little bit more subtle. And more not subtle. Let me say that where we don't have a one size fits all approach, where we're able to allow for more regional decision making, so as to where to focus the housing. Because from my perspective, I think it's crazy to incentivize greater growth in very high fire risk zones, for example. I think it's also crazy to focus on housing that's going to contribute to sprawl. The kind of the vision that I know that a lot of folks from urbanist thinking is actually infill, transit oriented. As you said, what did you say? 20-minute city, right? So where you're actually able to live and work, you're able to live somewhere that's really close to everything you need, your market, your job, your schools, and your other local amenities. And one of the problems with the way that we've grown is that everybody's living in one place and then we all have to commute 50 minutes to get somewhere else. So I'd like us to figure out a way that we can grow in a way that's more that's more reflective of the subtleties of our communities. And I know that's tricky. And I know the argument I get back from some of the pro-growth folks is that, well, that you get so bogged down in the nuance and then nothing ever happens. But I really so quite frankly, some of these bills have made me much more comfortable than others, and I haven't supported all these bills, quite frankly, because some of them I think have been too one size fits all. But some I think have actually allowed for example, this housing trust, the commercial zoning bill that we talked about before. I think those bills are going to allow for more housing growth in a way that's not going to be quite as impactful on neighborhoods as others. So that's a tricky thing here, and it's true. I mean, Konstantin's right. I am trying to balance, the needs of the communities that I represent, and quite frankly, I grew up in Santa Monica. I grew up in an R1 area. It's hard for me to feel like like R1 is kind of inherently racist. I mean, that's something that's kind of thrown out there a lot by folks. Because I think for a lot of people, they want to be able to live have a backyard and a home, and I also know that the history of zoning has been really tricky, and certainly the book that you referred to is a powerful one. I recommend folks read it. And I think it's important that we grapple with that legacy. I also think that just because the U.S. Army engaged in terrible massacres in the past doesn't mean we disband the Army, right? I think it's all about how do we rejigger the rules and the institutions in a way that will meet our needs both in terms of infrastructure, but also the very serious equity needs that Konstantin and others have raised. So that's what's tricky about all this. I mean, I think the situation calls out for nuance. Some of these bills have been very nuanced. There's a really interesting bill that YIMBY's doing right now with the Nature Conservancy, for example, that's calling for more density and infill, but actually in return calling for less push from the state, less mandates in high fire risk zones, in areas where new housing would call for more sprawl. That's something that the LA Times has editorialized in favor of. Chris Ward has this bill, so I'm still studying that bill. But maybe in that bill is the magic balance that we need to better strike here.
That's Assembly Bill 68. Sounds like you might be able to get your support on that one. Shameless plug. Well, I know she's been waiting for a while to have a question.
I know. Thanks. Hi, Senator Allen. I appreciate what you're doing with the controlled use of plastics. And you mentioned having to be aware of the real world when you're dealing with these solutions. I wish that you would also acknowledge that regarding the dozens of zoning laws that remove local control that are supposedly in the name of affordable housing, but literally do not even require a single affordable unit in new development. We have research that shows even putting in 10% affordable won't get us to fix the actual crisis, because you continue to allow developers to do what really earns them a lot of money, which is what developers like to do. Don't blame them. They like to earn money and make a lot of money. But when they put in 10% affordable and 90% market rate or luxury, that does not solve what the real crisis is, which is the affordable housing crisis. The bills are a glide path to developers who become de facto planners because the city no longer has the ability to stop anybody. Fire departments aren't allowed to weigh in because they're local. Infrastructure is not allowed to be used as a reason. So no water, 100-year-old sewers are not allowed to be a reason to stop it, and developers are not required to put in 1%. The subtle conversation you just talked about would have been such a great thing to do before Scott Wiener and Tony Atkins started pushing through, ramming through more than 70 bills that remove local control from every city. One size fits all, as you just said, is so wrong for a state this size and diversity. But these laws actually ignore our diversity and will first destroy successful communities of color, as my friends in Leimert Park and other places will tell you. Starter homes will not get cheaper because investors and speculators are being allowed to invest so much. We've renamed it, actually, it's YIMBY. YIMBY is bad enough. It's Wall Street in my backyard. And the fact that I'm one of the people that is painted with a brush of being YIMBY is so unbelievably offensive and wrong. So for all the Hispanic and Black members of all of our groups, to have them told that they're racist because they don't have the right to live in a home with a yard is just really amazing. It will make it a rental state, not an affordable home purchase state. And oh yeah, with no parking to boot, as if people that don't have a whole lot of money don't use their cars to get to their jobs. I would like to encourage everybody in this room, especially, I know a lot of people are not aware of the details. Some of these laws sound like they're such great ideas, but there's not. I want livable California to be a place you go for resources, but I'd like to know, Senator Allen, you have voted either for many of these laws or you have done an NPR on many of them, and I understand the politics of politics, I really do, but it's not getting us where we need to be. These laws are all one size fits all, and it's just a shame that Wiener and Atkins have been allowed to have that control, and I'd love to know if there's something you can do to slow this train down. There are already more laws that are in there that are going to continue what's going on. I'd love to know if there's something you can do to take that subtlety you look to say you express desire for, and the lack of one size fits all, and do something to show us that that's really where you're going ahead with this, instead of allowing YIMBYs to insult and push through and be partners. Right. So that's what I would really hope for. Thank you.
We have a lot of questions.
I know, but it's all really important stuff for him to ask.
Yeah, well, look, let me, well, first of all, let me be real clear. The NVR is effectively a no vote. I mean, everybody knows that in Sacramento. No, so and there's some of these bills I actually have voted directly no on. I think what, your question, like I'm one person in a 120 member body. It's not a matter of allowing, these folks to bring forward bills or pass these bills. I mean, the truth is that the real estate economics of other parts of the state are, quite frankly, very different than ours. And I think that you have a lot of members of the legislature, Democrats and Republicans alike, that embrace these bills because they see them as ways of getting more growth and more development, and they're not anywhere near as unpopular as they might be on the Hill or elsewhere in my district. So the challenge here, I think that the perspective you're articulating runs into is that other parts of the state, there's just not the same kind of pushback. And I think it's part of how you've seen these bills move forward as kind of quickly. You've seen it. Now, look, there's certainly been.
We have too many people
Okay,
who
but
want to
then
ask
you
a
just
question.
spent 15 minutes on the question.
You spent 15 minutes asking it.
Yeah. I mean, I will say.
Should I respond or should we just keep forward?
You can respond.
I'll just keep it brief. I mean, first of all, I think if you look at a lot of these bills, actually the sake that they're one size fits all, that they're stripping away local control is actually a little disingenuous. What they do is actually look at many of the bills, local governments, it's more about when you're streamlining, it's like, hey, this project fits all these things that are already on the books that are the requirements for this project to exist. We don't need the extra hearings, 4 or 5 additional hearings, and then to delay it for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years for it to get built. And in many cases, ultimately denied. So many of the bills are actually designed to say, okay, many of them still maintain a certain level of what is the requirements for that local municipality in terms of development. I think some exceptions you have is when you're talking about really like SB 9, where you're talking about, okay, you can do gentle density in a single family home neighborhood, right? Doesn't mean that everybody's going to all of a sudden turn the house into a fourplex. I'm sure many of you live in single family homes. You have no intention of building a fourplex or a duplex, right? You're going to keep that home. Maybe you might build an ADU for your grandkid to live in the back or something like that, right? But I think the reality is that what we're trying to stem against is kind of this exclusionary practice that has got us to this issue to begin with. So we're not stripping away local control. What we're saying is we can't have some of the tactics in terms of the endless delays that make the building so much more less affordable. When you also, the issues that when you're talking about communities of color, like in South Los Angeles, it's a different issue than you're talking about, say, up on the Hill or in Santa Monica or West LA, right? And so some of that lived experience, part of the reason why they're scared as hell about losing their single family homes, because we're not building in some of those other places so folks they have the great amenities and great schools and all those things, so folks are having to go and buy where they can afford, right? They probably would buy in their Santa Monica and the West LAs and their Hancock Parks if they could find a home that actually they could live in closer to their parents, right? That's what they grew up in, but they can't buy there, and so now they're forced to buy places where normally they would not live, and the folks that live in, some people might, which is great, always want to make room for new neighbors, but where the folks that are actually living in those communities, then now they don't have the opportunity to purchase homes in their own communities, and they're having to be forced further and further out. So if you look at like housing is just like this kind of continuum, you have to solve the crisis at every step, from where the best neighborhoods all the way down to where people are falling off the cliff in homelessness. If you're just putting a Band-Aid on people, you can get as many people out of houselessness as you want, but if you're not preventing people from falling off the cliff, which is what we've seen in Los Angeles over the last several years, because we have to be aggressively dealing with the issue all the way up, to continue all the way upstream. And that's kind of where we focus on, is like, how can we make sure that we're all points along the way, we're dealing with this crisis in a way that, so we're also preventing people from falling off the cliff as well. But anyway,
Okay, so, we have about 25 more minutes. We have people on Zoom and we have people in person. So I want to keep the questions short. And actually, if you guys could keep your answers shorter too, then we can get more in. But we're going to go to Zoom again. We have Mayron. Can you unmute?
Yes, I want to second and third the last two speakers. I mean, I'm a person of color, and but I don't think opposition to SB 9, SB 10 is a racist issue. As a Democrat, I also love the environment, and I love PV for its open spaces. And you know, when I was poor and I couldn't afford to live in PV, I didn't think they were racist against me. It was just free market economics. I couldn't afford to live in PV, and I don't want to change PV because I couldn't afford it. I worked hard so that I can live in PV and I can enjoy the environment, the beautiful areas that it is. But my question to Ben Allen, which is also along the same lines of these equity issues, is slightly related to your topic, is this push by California legislators, officials, some of them, to eliminate on the basis of equity, honors and AP classes. That to me is almost as bad as these defund the police messaging. You will have many people in Democrats also, I mean, it's totally indefensible. The way to bring equity is to teach and raise people at the bottom, not to teach less of math and less of AP classes. So I feel like officials should really do what they didn't do in the defund the police movement, is to speak up clearly that this is not what Democrats stand for and put an end to it before we all get labeled as people who want to lower education in the name of equity.
Yeah, I don't support doing away with AP classes and honors classes. I don't support that. I do think that we need to do better at raising all ships in our school system, and I do think that one of the challenges that we sometimes see in schools is that you get some of the better teachers or the better classroom experience in those classes, and a lot of other kids are ultimately left behind. So I think the reason why, you see this push among certain researchers is because they have data to suggest that in a lot of places, the non-honors track is just pretty inadequate for a lot of kids. And of course, we end up seeing a distressing correlation, both racial and socioeconomic, with regards to kids getting into those classes or not. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. I agree with your other premise though, which is doing away with those classes without really providing for a good, smart alternative, which quite frankly, one thing I've said publicly, I serve on the Instructional Quality Commission. We were going over the math standards, and I brought up the issue that we just weren't, while they present a kind of a wonderful kind of plan for how to address all of the achievement and academic rigor challenges that might come along with doing away with honors and AP classes. There's just nothing close to the kind of implementation and resources for training and everything else. It takes so much work. It really takes a special teacher to provide the kind of nuanced, subtle, intelligent, high-level, differentiated instruction in a classroom with kids at various different levels. And so, in a perfect world, we'd be able to provide for that for every classroom, but we're far from that, unfortunately, and it's a problem. But so I don't support getting rid of honors and AP classes. However, I ask people who also don't support it to also grapple with how incredibly inadequate a lot of our public schooling system is right now, especially for kids of color and low-income kids who are often excluded from those classes. Doing away with it unilaterally, I don't think it's going to solve the problem, but doing nothing is also not a solution either. And so I think we've got to spend time on trying to address some of the broader equity issues that motivate those people that want to take this drastic and I think unwise sledgehammer to our system. I'm happy to get more into those details, but I know we got a lot of questions.
Let's see, I'm an individual who would like to increase the density of my own property. And I have the wherewithal to do it. But the laws that you're trying to enact in the location that I am in doesn't quite get there. And here's my issue. I'm on a small lot. I would like, and my property is, my house was built in 1912. The infrastructure is completely falling apart. I would like to replace it all. Since I'm on a small lot, I don't want to put an ADU in the back. I don't want to put an ADU in the front. What I'd like to do is to raise the house completely, build in the same footprint that I have, but have 2 floors beneath, a 3-story, effectively a 3-story house. But I'm in an R1 coastal commission that only allows 27 feet high. And I'm also regulated by mega properties. They don't want mega big houses. And when I look at the thing, I see 10 feet for a garage so that all the cars can be parked off the street. I see another 10 feet of the first story, another 10 feet of the second story, and a 6-foot roof so that I get the solar stuff and be all in compliance. But if I add those numbers up, I come up with 37 feet, and the coastal regulation is at 27. So I can't get there from here. Can you help me so that you can make the law to include that so that people with the wherewithal can actually make housing for 3 more families in an area and work toward the individual? I always thought that, you think locally, and I'm thinking my own property, very selfishly, but we could act globally and help the whole state if you could just make it more flexible, because we've got all these tents in the sidewalks and et cetera. Thank you. That's
The issue is that you're in the coastal zone. Is that why? Is that right? Uh-huh.
Yes, sir.
So you'd like to see sort of SB 9 cover the whole state? Is it not just every neighborhood?
Yes, I would like to
Right.
have, because some of those coastal commission laws and some of the regulations that we have were made a long time ago, like when the house, well, it wasn't when it was 1912 when it was built, but if somebody needs to fix just a little portion of the infrastructure, when you think about just raising the whole thing and starting from scratch, all brand new, you don't have to worry about the infrastructure.
I think we got it.
Okay.
Yeah. But is the issue with the coastal commission, or is it the fact that SB 9, largely exempts the coastal zone?
Coastal Commission and the city of Los Angeles.
Oh, the city. Yeah, this is the tricky thing, right? I mean, I think, I guess, if our law allowed for this, I think a lot of people might feel more comfortable with these kinds of bills. If it was truly a guy like, if we were dealing with folks like you, a homeowner who wants to actually live on the property, versus, a big, how do we treat someone who wants to be truly owner occupied for a long period of time, versus a kind of a big corporation that might come in, buy a ton of properties, and then just turn them all into higher density units and doesn't have the kind of connection to the property and to the community and the neighborhood that you might have. And that's something I'd love to see us. Sorry?
We got to another question,
Okay.
so I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the coastal commission is just a challenge. It's definitely one. I mean, if you look at where most of the jobs are, they're kind of a lot of them tend to be in that coastal zone. And so we really have to start thinking about looking at legislation to smartly deal with that, not having to be exempt to every law, like to your point.
If you allowed.
I mean, the coastal commission is supposed to be about access. That's really their main jam. So I'm surprised that.
Yeah, but I would say that what we've seen is a lot of the times that coastal zone has been a barrier to the building of more density. It just has been in practice, and it's effectively in a lot of some of the bills. That's part of it. They end up getting exempted from the coastal zone. So one of the things I know us as an organization are looking at is making sure that we're looking at the coastal zone and ways that we can make sure that they're included as part of these like smart density bills in terms of infill, because it's great jobs. That's where folks want to live. So we want to make sure that people have access to that. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this. No. Oh, here.
Well, just
No, just leave it on there.
Okay, perfect, okay. Hi, Senator Allen, it's John Davidson, how are you?
Hey there, nice to see you.
Good to see you. I know you're very concerned about the environment, and I am as well. I thank you for passing your legislation on plastics. But here's the rub on all this stuff with the housing. There is no way for a city to stop a project in a questionable environmental area. One is in Torrance, which is called Butcher Hill, which everyone knows about, where we found a lot of really bad chemicals underground. And I'm just wondering how, if a project under SB 9 has been streamlined and must be approved ministerially, how the cities are going to deal with this. Because evidently CEQA is going down the drain, and I'm very concerned about CEQA. And I wonder if you can address this, because people like myself who've worked with the Sierra Club for so long have huge concerns. And yet when something has to be approved ministerially, it's going to just get the rubber stamp yes. And I'm very concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, CEQA definitely doesn't seem to have the support up in Sacramento that it used to. I'm really concerned about it too. I mean, it's, you know, everyone and their mother now seems to want to be running a bill for CEQA streamlining or CEQA exemptions for various things. And I'm open to those things if those projects really do provide a discernible environmental benefit. But half the time, the things that are brought forward, seem to meet another societal goal that really isn't at the heart of what we're trying to address with CEQA. Now that, I think we all know that CEQA has been used for reasons totally unrelated to the environment, right? In a union or a developer trying to mess with another one, or one group going up against another. But it certainly provided such an important basis for thoughtful planning in a lot of ways. And I would certainly, I think, and I've been saying this to the Sierra Club for quite some time, I think they need to get in the game of really trying to get involved in the CEQA conversation, as opposed to just, because I think just thinking that they're going to just sort of say no over and over again to any changes to CEQA, is not proven to be the case. I think there's an increasing willingness amongst a lot of my colleagues to take to really take some radical things about taking a hatchet job to CEQA, and it certainly does concern me. I mean, the Republicans all wanted, they would repeal it tomorrow, and more Democrats, I think, are seeing it as a real barrier to, or at least as being very vulnerable to manipulation. And it's something we're really struggling with at the Environmental Quality Committee, quite frankly, trying to manage the inflow of CEQA modifications that everyone keeps asking for.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to say much more on that. I think Senator Allen is right in terms of what we've seen is people abuse CEQA. Like, on its face, CEQA is great. We're very pro-environment. That's why we have running a bill with the Nature Conservancy about, let's build where it's smart and not where it's, let's protect our environment, not build with people in harm's way, either putting people in harm's way or protecting our beautiful natural resources that make California so great. But folks have just been abusing it, and it hasn't been just used for. And so I think, a lot of times when the exemptions to CEQA, at least the ones that we see in current law, there are still the protections there. It's just more about once they pass that initial review and everything checks off, again, folks can't use that to just delay. And that's the issue. What is CEQA? Senator Allen?
The California Environmental Quality Act, and it was passed to basically provide for a substantial environmental review for substantial projects that are discretionary, where the city has an opportunity to weigh in, modify, reform, reject a particular project, industrial, commercial, or residential in nature. The crux of the question is, as we shift more types of projects to ministerial decision-making, it basically takes those, so as in the local government doesn't have a say in a substantive way in either rejecting or reforming or refining or amending a project. It basically takes CEQA out of the picture. So we're no longer, as we make projects ministerial in their approval, no longer will they have to undergo an environmental impact report and the CEQA process. Now, what Konstantin was talking about is that the CEQA process is all fine and good for most projects, but occasionally CEQA, is used. People sue under CEQA, and projects can get tied up for years. It can lead to a lot of unpredictability and cost. And that's led to a real backlash up in Sacramento. I think there's a lot of value to CEQA, and I think projects are almost always improved by CEQA. I guess one of the questions is, how do we figure out a way to ensure that CEQA really ends up continuing to be an important tool for improving projects, for engaging public input, and really studying lots of different factors that really do make a difference in how a project is implemented, how it impacts a community. How do we make sure that it does all of that good work, but doesn't become used as a leverage tool? And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are starting to turn toward expedited review, where we would provide, where we allow for CEQA lawsuits, but they'd have to be resolved within a certain amount of time, so that a project can get back on course. Now, the judges hate that, because from their perspective, you're basically putting CEQA cases ahead of everyone else. Why should a CEQA, what they'll say is, why should a CEQA case be ahead of any other dispute, or a domestic violence case, or a civil rights case? And their point's well taken there, right? They think that they basically will say, well, we're woefully underfunded, and now you're stepping in and telling us we have to resolve these cases within a certain amount of time when you're not providing us with the resources, and you've got an enormous caseload. So this is the challenge that we're facing right now. I will say, SB 9, it did make a lot of things ministerial. I did not support SB 9. I will tell you, SB 50, which was the SB 9 was ultimately a much, Konstantin's right, it's a much gentler densification bill than what SB 50, which almost passed the legislature. SB 50 would have unilaterally upzoned most of our area. And done so, and taken all those projects out of CEQA, and that came within inches of passage, and it certainly would have been signed by the governor. So to the extent that SB 9 is, it only allows for kind of lot splits, as much as folks may not like it, it's far less. It allows for far less of the kind of growth that SB 50 would have allowed.
Actually, we have one more on Zoom. Mike, you can unmute yourself.
Well, I was going to ask a question, but the senator just pointed out to that. And I just want to ask one question now that I have the opportunity. Does this Article 34 have anything to do with the homelessness? Does it address that issue as well?
I mean, it does, to the extent that it will make it easier for truly affordable. There was an earlier question asked about, why aren't we really focusing on affordable housing? Article 34 repeal really does focus on affordable housing. It's really focused on low rent housing. So to the extent that this is about taking down a barrier to the production of locally approved public housing, basically, so many of the people who will be housed in the projects that will go online as a result of repealing Article 34 are people who are on the brink of homelessness. We're talking about low-income folks that are on the edge and who really need some help. And this is just going to make it easier for these projects to move forward. Once again, no project moves forward under Article 34 repeal without the support of the local government. So it doesn't have the same kinds of local control implications that the other bills that we've been talking about have. And it really does focus directly in on those people who are on the verge of homelessness. So it will help.
Thank you.
I just want to know, are any of these bills dealing with the shortening of the approval process for building affordable housing? I was part of an investor group, and we had bought a house with a big lot in the back, and we wanted to put 2 or 3 units up. It went through 3 different planners, I think a couple of different building officials. After a year, we still didn't have final approval. because they dropped out of the project. It was so frustrating. Local control is one thing, but but if you want more affordable housing and you have all these hoops that I think is unnecessary, I don't know. So anyway, so I don't know what's being done about that, or if anything, if you just let me know, I appreciate it.
Can you just say your name?
Oh, Adrian Tatum.
What city? What city?
I live in Rolling Hill Estates, but the particular project was in County of LA.
Was where?
County of LA.
County of LA, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think part of why folks like Konstantin are working so hard to try to move a lot of this stuff from discretionary to ministerial is that they feel as though cities, counties, just make it too hard. That they put all these new requirements and strictures and they make it too hard. So the flip side argument is, look, this is the only way for us to be able to impose, requirements to make sure that projects are giving back, that they're meeting all sorts of goals, and whether social or policy goals that we have. But this whole question of permit reform is really important. And once again, it's hard because everybody, there's always a reason why all these permits are necessary, and yet collectively they end up really making it difficult for projects to move forward, even projects that most of us can agree are really good. And it really is a big motivation behind, at least Konstantin can speak for himself, but at least my understanding is it's a big reason why there is such a push to move toward more ministerial approval.
I mean, your experience is exactly what we're trying to work against. I mean, it's a great project, it should move forward, but all the hoops makes it not happen. And that's what we see time and time and time and time and time again. And so that's the crux of what we're trying to do is let's make it easier, faster, and cheaper to build for folks that want to just build homes for people. I mean, we have a housing crisis. We know we're about 3.5 million, maybe now closer to 3 million short on houses, right? We need to build. We need people that build them, right? And so there's a place for developers, there's a place for people that build homes. No one will look at you and say you're a greedy developer, right? You just wanted to build some affordable housing, right? And you should be able to. And you should be able to. And that's the crux of what we're trying to do. One of the things we're trying to work on this year is extending SB 35, which streamlines a streamlining bill that affordable housing that's actually resulted in thousands of units of affordable housing being built over the last few years. And so trying to permanently extend that and also make that available for multi-income housing, mixed income housing, excuse me. And so that we can continue to work on this so that folks that want to do the right thing, that want to have SB, build a couple of units and for folks and more families that want to build affordable housing, that you can do so. And so that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, avoiding building houses in dangerous areas, or there's in almost all these bills there's still an element of, it's not about taking away what local governments want in terms of want to see out of housing, some of the restrictions. A lot of those design standards and things still are in place. There's limits to what you can build in terms of setbacks, in terms of FAR and some of these other things. But what we're really saying is, hey, this project meets all those things you have outlined in your policies. We don't need to have another conversation for another 3 years on this project. Let's get it built, right? It satisfied the needs. You did it. They did it. They went through the checklist, it satisfied. Now let's get it built. We don't need to have another 3 years of conversation on it. And that's really when we're talking about streamlining, what we're trying to work towards, and we'll continue to. I would love to get your guys' stories, because that's the narrative. You're the folks that we want to elevate the discussion. That people want to say, oh, it's between NIMBYs or people that just want massive apartments. But the reality is, most developers are going to be folks like you that just want to do the right thing for their communities, have more inclusive families, help push more families to be able to live.
So that is a great conclusion from Konstantin, I think, and I would like to give Senator Allen well, I would like you to be able to have a concluding remark as well. We're out of time for questions, but if you have a concluding remark.
Oh, I really, first of all, really appreciate the club for putting this together. These are tough issues. I'm certainly really, I tried to be as candid as I possibly could be about the trade-offs and the difficult challenges that we're facing, so I appreciate everyone's attention. I certainly, I heard everyone, and I'm, trying to craft a kind of a philosophy here with how to engage these bills and in a way that that conforms with the reality that I know in my own district. And of course, every district's very different. The real estate economics are quite frankly very different, from the Central Valley to Imperial Empire to where we are. So I ask you to engage with our office, and I just continue to appreciate the activism and engagement that everyone brought to this conversation. There's some tough issues at play here, and from my perspective, I think we need nuance, and that means both respect for local conditions that I think underlay a lot of the comments that were made, but it also involves an understanding of the broad housing production goals that the state feels so strongly about needing to meet, and trying to figure out a balance between the two. That's what I'm struggling with, quite frankly, right now. And it's not been an easy part of the job. And but I really appreciate this discussion. It's really been great for me to get my mind kind of moving in a couple different directions about ways that I can be helpful. And I, as always, appreciate the folks in this club a great deal. So thank you so much for being here, and look forward to seeing you all in person, maybe at the picnic. So.
I just wanted to say just a quick thank you to Senator Allen. I know it's tough, and he was in a tough district, and his thoughtfulness and his partnership on some bills, and even understanding where he can't support other things. I still really respect his thought process and leadership on these issues, because I know it's tough. And so I just want to say thank you to that, and I want to say thank you to you all for just inviting me here and having this really just thought-provoking discussion. It's super helpful for me just to understand what folks are feeling, and also just appreciate you welcoming us and having this, tough discussion. And it's been great though, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
We should give special applause to Konstantin. I know it's not easy to come in and have this discussion, and you comport yourself really well, and looking forward to further discussion. I just encourage all you in the audience, go chat with him. I mean, Konstantin is obviously got full. He's a sharp guy, and I think it would be good for the dialogue to begin. So thank you for being there, Konstantin, and thank you, Ann, for pulling all this together.
Appreciate that.
It is amazing to have both of you here, and it was a great dialogue. It's hard to do this in a hybrid situation, especially when you're both not in the same room, and so we're all honored